So thank you all for coming. Um, we are very pleased to have Zach Edwards with us today, virtually from Keene Valley in the Adirondacks, where I think probably most of us wish we were, rather than Alfred. I know Fred was there last weekend. I was there 2 weekends ago. Zach graduated in 2008 from Alfred Almond and then went to Cornell, where he received a BS in biological engineering. Worked for Outward Bound for 8 years, I think he said, leading wilderness expeditions across the US. And now he's also worked in the Sierra Nevada mountains and city parks of Philadelphia, lots of places all over the country. And now is, I think now is working for the DEC as a trail crew leader. At least that's what he's going to talk to us about. So I'm going to turn it over to him. At the end, we'll put questions on chat, and then I'll either call on people or Zach can read them off, whatever seems to work. And we'll go from there. All right, I'm going to turn it over to you, Zach.
Great. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming today to this Zoom meeting. And yeah, I graduated from Alfred Almond in 2008, just as was said. And I'm just going to give a little bit of context, just a history of how I got to where I am. I think in my line of work, context is really important, where people come from, how they ended up where they are. And that flow of people is really important. So I grew up in Alfred Station on Foster's Lake Road, if you know where that is, up in a geodesic dome up by Foster's Lake, surrounded in the woods, very woodlandy there. And I spent a lot of my early days just tromping around. I have a lot of really detailed memories of just walking around in the woods as like a 5-year-old. So the woods is a place that's really comfortable for me. I know that's not true of everybody. I know a lot of people who I work with who grew up in like a desert setting who think the woods is very scary. They don't like being in that enclosed space. And for me, it is a very safe place. That is the place where I feel very happy, my happy zone. So yeah, that kind of progressed. And I spent a lot of my childhood outside playing sports and the like. And then at some point at the ripe age of 12, I went on my first backpacking trip, very formative, with the Boy Scouts of America. And a whopping 5-mile journey one night, and it kicked my butt for sure, as backpacking does. But something must have stuck because I kept on doing that. That's something I kept doing, which is something I reflect back on now that I'm here and doing what I do today. It's like, why did I keep doing that? I still don't fully understand. Like a lot of my early backpacking experiences, either on the Finger Lakes Trail or in Pennsylvania, we use the Susquehanna Trail system a lot, or coming up here to the Adirondacks where I live now. Man, we just made mistake after mistake, which is how you learn, which is great. But I have very vivid memories of being stuck in rainstorms, completely soaked, nowhere to go. I remember once my friend Matt, he walked out with just like all the dry clothes that we had left, which was just like 5 pairs of underwear from everybody, and he had a garbage bag on, and that was like how we survived. But after that, we came back, we kept doing it. So it started with the Boy Scouts. I started backpacking, but then later in high school and then through college, it's something that I took on my own with friends. Yeah, so I ended up spending a lot of time walking around in the woods. And then, yeah, I graduated Alfred Almond in 2008, moved into Cornell University, which fantastic institution. Love Cornell University for a lot of reasons. Will say, from an honest perspective, I had a lot of trouble adjusting to that place when I first got there. I think just very different from Alfred, kind of just a whole lot of people, 20,000 people in the student body, far bigger than the entire size of Alfred, let alone the student population. So for me, it took a while, definitely getting in the groove there. And the place where I really first found my niche and the people that really resonated with me, who I got along with the most, who I'm still friends with today, were in Cornell outdoor education. So yeah, I went to school for biological engineering and South Asian studies. I spent a bunch of time in Nepal in college. But then I didn't major in outdoor education. Wasn't something you could do. Wasn't something I'd really even heard of before going to college. But a lot of my mentors had worked for Outward Bound, for Knowles, for Student Conservation Association. And yeah, gave me a foot in the door. Really close mentor of mine, Chris Leeming, set me up with a job at Outward Bound after I graduated. And yeah, COE, Cornell Outdoor Education, was just a really great place for me kind of to learn and grow and expand my knowledge. And basically I started out hiking. Most of what I did was hiking. I would lead backpacking trips or day hiking trips for students who needed gym credit. They would get PE credit. I would get paid as a student job. Um, and I did that for all 4 years of college. And I graduated. I had this fancy engineering degree. I had walked around in the woods a bunch. I had gotten really into beekeeping. That was another thing that I was really involved with in school. And I decided I'm going to do the thing that involves my body while my body still works really good. So I'm going to start with the just walking around a whole bunch and see where that takes me. And at COE, Cornell Outdoor Education, I learned a lot about the power of backpacking and just being in the woods with groups of people, what that can do for people, how it affects people, maybe differently than it affects me. And yeah, I had a couple of really formative experiences where a lot of that program was just skills based. I was literally just teaching people hiking skills, but there were a couple of instances in my mind that I really pinned as like, wow, something really serious is happening here for somebody in their head. And what am I going to do with that? So Outward Bound was kind of that next step. I went in spring break of my senior year. I was doing training for Outward Bound. One of the greatest times of my life. It was pretty wild. I liked the intensity of it. I liked the way that people were approaching life and thinking about what they were doing and being intentional with that. And yeah, like 2 days after I graduated from Cornell, I was in a canoe in the Delaware Water Gap, and I stayed there, yeah, for 8 years. I was in Outward Bound. I started in Philadelphia and Baltimore, Outward Bound. They run a whole lot of program on the Appalachian Trail. They run a whole lot of program on the Delaware River and Potomac River. They do a bunch of day programs, and they work a whole lot with schools doing 5-day expeditions with all kinds of schools, public schools, private schools, charter schools. That's where I kind of cut my teeth. But then I did end up going to Minnesota for a winter and doing dog sledding and skiing expeditions there. And ultimately, my final rotation, I ended up in California and the Sierra Nevada in the summer. I would do really long format courses in the Sierra Nevada, 22 days, 14 days, 30 days, doing backpacking, rock climbing, alpine mountaineering with groups. And then I would come back to Philadelphia, where I was home based. And in the spring and the fall, I would work with those school groups on shorter format, 5-day courses or day programs. So good way for me to just work different sides of my brain, do the day program, do the 30-day course, back to day programs. And Outward Bound, really amazing program. Highly recommend it to anybody, youth, adults, people who want to work there, people who want to take a course. Yeah, really incredible experiential ed organization. And yeah, no qualms leaving there. Basically, my partner, Emma Dosh, who also was an Alfred Almond graduate in 2008, she left her job in Philadelphia and then took a job up here in the Adirondacks. And I could be kind of mobile and go wherever I wanted with my job. So I was like, I'm going to go to the Adirondacks and I'm going to take a break from Outward Bound because I've been doing that for a long time. And yeah, I kind of noodled around and was like, what am I going to do? I don't know. All I've done is lead these trips. I saw a advertisement from the Department of Environmental Conservation come through the tube. They were seeking people to join a trail crew, and I said I would hop on. My official New York State title that I was trying to get was laborer. I wanted to be a laborer for the Department of Environmental Conservation, and I'd never built trails before, and they said, you look like the trail crew supervisor. And I said, I've never built a trail before. That seems like kind of a big flaw in the plan. And they assured me that I just needed to be good at managing people in the outdoor space and I could learn the trail building later. And I was like, okay, hire however you want, do whatever you need to do. They hired me as the trail crew leader. So that was last year, which is 2020. I led the DEC High Peaks Trail crew. Yeah, and I'd always wanted to lead a trail crew, or not lead a trail crew, just be on one. It's a world that I've been curious about just because I've spent so much time walking up and down trails that it's a way I've wanted to give back, and a type of work that I could see myself really getting excited about is that type of labor. And yeah, it just never panned out because all the things that were hard about trail crew, a lot of times trail crews will go out in big hitches. They'll go out usually on like, I don't know, it depends on the crew, but like 8 days on, 6 days off is pretty common, where you'll go deep into the wilderness and do your thing for a week and then come out. So those big times away, I was like, I kind of want to be home. And this was a job I could commute to on Mount Van Hoevenberg. The trail crew that I ended up on was doing a pretty specific thing. We were building a new trail up this mountain called Mount Van Hoevenberg. Pretty large scale project, and that's mostly what I'm going to delve into in my talk today. Is the Van Hoevenberg Trail, how it's going, what it's doing, how trails get built, how do they end up there. That being said, I'm going to have questions and answers at the end of the talk, and I'm happy to talk about whatever you want to talk about. If you want to ask a question about Outward Bound and what that looks like, or experiential education, or anything about the trail, I'm totally open to it. But I'm going to delve into trails. And the first thing I really just want people to think about for a minute is, what is a trail? We're going to start really basic here. And I don't want to put too much of my spin on it at first. I'm literally just going to sit here. If you all were in a classroom, I'd have you chat about it, but you're not. We're on Zoom. We're on our own independent room. So I'm literally just going to sit in silence for like 15 seconds. And I just want you to think about trails in general, any kind of trail that you've seen, that you've been on, that you've heard of. Think really broad, and think about, how did it get there? Like, how is a trail made? How is a trail produced? What is it for? Who is it for? Is it just for people? Is it for animals? Is it for something else? And maybe think about some of the edge conditions of that too, like a road. Is a road a trail? So think on that for just a minute. Consider for yourself what you think a trail might be. Excellent. And this is where I do a cool Q&A thing and be like, what do you think a trail is? But that seems too hard on Zoom. So instead, I'm just going to delve into some of my own thoughts about trails that I've mused on. I mean, a trail to me is just a way to get from one point to another that is replicable, that something else can follow. It's like you're creating a path and something else can use that path. Could be for people. I mean, that's how we use it. I do think a road is just a really hardened trail. It's like a replicable path. Lots of people use roads every day. It's one type of trail we've used. And a lot of the road beds that we use in the United States have been trails for forever, basically. If either native people in the area were using them as roads or using them as footpaths or trails, or before that, a lot of the roads we used were like buffalo herd paths, things that had already been trampled down. It was just easy for people to follow. So I think there's a lot of ways they can happen. And there's a lot of ways that they're made too, especially if you're taking this really broad definition that I'm walking with of what a trail is. Like ants. Ants are very cool. I like ants. I don't know if anyone's ever seen the ants that really do the trail thing and watch them for a while, but they're making trails with pheromones. All they're doing is just dropping a little piece of scent as they go so that they can find their way back to their nest. If they find something really good, then they follow their trail back out again, and it makes the trail stronger. They're basically voting for that trail, like, ooh, there's something good. And as that pheromone trail gets stronger, more ants join it, and they keep following that pheromone trail and walking down the trail. And they're dropping all their pheromones. So the better whatever there is, the better the reward at the end of that trail, the stronger that trail gets, and then it just completely disappears. It just dissipates. So if if ants stop using it. So yeah, ants cast a vote with their movement. People do the same thing. I don't know how much time people have spent hiking around or pitching around in the woods, or even just day to day. I'm sure you can see it around. There's a lot of really intentional trails that are all over the world. And also people take a vote. Wherever people walk, a trail happens, and it may be a temporary trail. It may not be very well planned out, but social trails are really common off of a lot of the trails I hike in this area or in the Sierra Nevada or anywhere else, where some people think they see a good view off to the left. So they start walking that way, and then it starts looking like a trail. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't what people built. Or I really like too in Google Maps, if you zoom out on Cornell University and zoom into one of the quads, like the arts quad, there's all these sidewalks that are going all over the place, that are really nice looking, really well paved, really intentional. The university put a lot of thought into it. And then also from the Google Maps image, you can see all these trails that people made. Basically any door between any two buildings is connected by a straight line. People aren't, just because there's that path there doesn't mean people want to stay on it. People want to get the most efficient way from point A to point B. So a lot of times they'll just make their own paths, regardless of what planners think. So the importance of your purpose, if you're designing a trail, is huge. Like what do you want the trail to be used for, given all of these super variables? And the fact that people will make their own votes like ants. Other trails will start to form. If you haven't designed your trail for what the intention is, a lot of times it'll kind of get carved out into a different path that you don't want for various reasons. So yeah, like using the appropriate trail is really important. You wouldn't want to go to the summit of a fragile mountain ecosystem with a giant paved road. I mean, it does happen, but the ecological footprint of that is really huge. And it probably doesn't suit what a lot of the users are trying to get out of that particular trail. It might, if their goal is strictly to be at the summit. But if people are trying to get sort of a destination, they're trying to get some energy out, what they want to use that trail for is to see nature. A road might not do it. It might, but it might not. Yeah. And then, yeah, like a road is a trail for cars. There's all kinds of other things you could use trails though for, like ski trails. Ski trails are designed totally different than hiking trails. Just like one minor thing you might think about with that is like on a ski trail or trail designed for skiing, the markers for the trail are going to be up really high, because if it snows and you're on 2 feet of snow or 3 feet of snow, you don't want the markers to be at your knee level. And things that aren't designed for skiing, which I've spent a lot of time on skiing, also pretty brutal, not designed for it. A lot of times birches or other types of trees will just bend over the trail, it disappears, it's gone. So thinking about the end result of what you want, what you think people are going to use that trail for, becomes the most important piece in your design element. So I'm going to talk a little bit, I'm going to hop into the Van Hoevenberg project in just a minute here, but I'm just going to really quickly visit these principles called sustainable trail design principles. Sustainable, I feel like, is a word that gets thrown around for a whole lot of things these days and could mean all kinds of things. In trail world, if you start looking at what sustainable trail building means, you're going to end up finding this set of ethos all over the place. It's not new. I actually tried to do some research on where they came from. I'm not sure exactly who started these concepts, but they're concepts that have been being used for a long time. And I'm going to share my screen and pull up a slide here. This is my boom, I'm in. This is my one written out slide with numbers and math on it. Otherwise, we'll just be looking at pictures. But the sustainable trails, whenever you're talking about and using those words, usually people in the industry are referring to these 5 sets of rules. There's other ones that you could expand on as well. Like a sustainable trail, you wouldn't want to trudge through a really fragile ecosystem, or you wouldn't want to uproot important cultural spaces, and things along those lines. So that is like another aspect of sustainable trail building. But when people are talking about the building, usually these are the 5 concepts they're referring to. I'll just really brief run into these.
I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm not seeing anything.
Oh,
I don't know if anybody else is.
haha, you're about to. Check this out.
Okay.
Look at that.
Okay, perfect.
You get me now?
Yep.
Thanks for saying that. Boom. So these 5 rules, some of them are pretty straightforward. Some of them you wouldn't think about necessarily. Having, I don't know if everyone knows what grade is. I'm sure people have heard of grade or grading in a construction sense, or seen on a road grade that certain trucks are only allowed on a certain grade of thing. It basically is just like a metric of how steep something is. We use it a ton in trail building. You're always measuring grades, and how they're measured is in rise over run. So how many feet up you're going divided by how much distance you're covering. So for instance, if you wanted to climb 1 foot every 10 feet forward, that would be a 10% grade, 1 over 10. And if you wanted to do a 20% grade, that would be you're raising 2 feet for every 10 feet that you're walking. So for a sustainable trail, they say that a 10% average grade is what you should shoot for over the whole trail. These aren't numbers we really worked with a whole lot as the trail crew in our day-to-day, because this is more of like a bird's eye planning the trail out. Like the Van Hoe Trail is about 1,000 feet of gain. So before we even started designing it, someone did the math and figured out how much length of trail you need to go up that high, and started thinking about where you would lay that trail out on the mountain. So the sustainable trail building really starts really way back in the planning phase before it ever gets off the ground. If you don't have a path that's going to meet this 10% grade, then you have to start thinking about how to reroute it or zigzag it to make it get to there. The half rule, I think, is the most confusing one. I'll front load with that. But the basic premise of the half rule is that most sustainable trails, the goal is going to be going on a cross slope, that there's the hill that's going up behind you, but you don't want to go straight up the hill. That's called a fall line trail, where if you drop something, it would fall and roll down that path, down the fall line. You're trying to go against the fall line, basically perpendicular to the fall line. You want to be going across the slope so that water will come down the hill, go across your trail, and then dive back off again. Instead of coming down, ending up on your trail, which is now a very convenient downhill path, and all the water shunts directly down that same path. That causes a huge amount of erosion. So the half rule is something we use to avoid that. Basically, the grade of your trail, you never want to exceed half of the grade of the steepness of the hill. You basically want your trail to be less steep than the hill. That is the goal. Maximum sustainable grade of 15% is what we were using for our trail. It's based on soil type and a lot of other things, but it's what it sounds like. It's like the steepest individual section of your trail shouldn't exceed a certain amount, again, so that water can't gain speed going down it and erode it away. I'm going to skip over grade reversals for a second to outslope. And that's kind of what it sounds like too. If you can picture a bench cutting across a hillside, you want your trail actually be tilted out a little bit, not enough that people would notice it in their ankles, but enough that water is going to want to flow sideways and sheet off of it. And that number tends to be about 5%, where people won't notice that their ankles are bent a little bit, but it will still shed water. And then a grade reversal is basically, if you can see in this picture, this is a picture of a stretch of the Van Hoevenberg Trail. And you'll notice it's not a straight line as it goes all the way back to the top. It's actually zigzagging. And even though ultimately this trail is climbing to the highest point you can see in the picture, it's going up and down every, 40 feet. It's actually taking a dip and then going back up again. If you made this all a big straight line, water could just flow straight from the top all the way to the bottom, and more water would collect as more water comes off this hillside. But by keeping these little dips in it, every time there's a dip, there's an opportunity for water to fall off that dip before going back into an uphill. It basically makes like a smaller area that you have to worry about water shunting off of. So ideally, in a sustainable trail, you're going to use grade reversals to shunt water, and you're going to avoid trying to use structures like this one, which is really beautiful. There's a structure here in the foreground. That's a hard bottom drain. There's a huge slab of stone in the bottom of that. Mostly that is to collect water that's coming from the right. There's water coming from the downhill off the right side that'll shoot through that drain instead of going across the trail. But ideally, you wouldn't want to use any sort of structures if you can avoid it. Any sort of structure eventually is going to clog with material. And the goal basically is to not have maintenance in a sustainable trail. I mean, there's going to be some limited amount of like branches falling and tree clearing that has to happen. But beyond that, the hope is that it just sustains itself, and that you don't need to go in there. And when this trench fills with leaves, you won't have to send somebody out with a hoe to go rake it all out every year or what have you. Yeah, I'm going to stop the share. Bring me back. I'm back. Yeah, so all of those sustainable trail principles that I just ran through really quick, those were pretty much water mitigation. I mean, that's the main thing that you can think about those as. Those are keeping water from eroding the trail. Water can do a huge amount of damage to like a soil structure. So all you can do to limit water is good. There's also other parts of thinking through a sustainable trail design that aren't water, that aren't included in those. I talked about a couple of those, but even just with wear and trail to the trail, the biggest one that I think happens on a pretty regular basis is just walking. Like I said, people like will walk their own way and create their own path. And I'm gonna share again. That was brief with Zach. We're sharing. And I want you to look again at this picture where that drain is. To the right side of it, there's 3 boulders. They're not part of the drain, they're just sitting there. But those are intentional boulders. They were placed there, they didn't magically roll there out of somewhere. These ones off to the right are called gargoyles. That's what we call them in trail building world. They were essentially just put there to deter people, to create a visual barrier. People aren't going to want to walk above that drain. If people were to start walking to the right of that drain, eventually where those rocks were would depress with their footfalls, and all the water, instead of going down the drain, would now shunt directly onto the trail through where people were walking. You start seeing this all the time. If you really want to ruin trails for yourself, not ruin them, make them better, but still make it so that you can't just walk, but you just start seeing stuff all the time, you should join a trail crew, because you start knowing what people do. It becomes not just a pathway anymore. It becomes a structure that people really intentionally designed. So gargoyles, you'll find all over trails that were built if you start looking for them. And we also would think about where we're routing the trail. We've rerouted whole sections of trail that would take my team of 6. So there were 6 people on our crew. It would take us, I don't know, maybe we'd spend a week rerouting a trail just so that it would go to the left of a tree instead of to the right of a tree. Because we just looking down the trail, we're like, oh, if someone's talking to their friend, they're going to go to the other side of that tree. And eventually that tree is going to die because people are off the tread and they're eroding what's around the tree. So people is another thing to think about. And essentially goal is to have no maintenance. So the Van Hoe project, I'm going to delve into that now. That specific project is designed to be a sustainable trail project in the Adirondack High Peaks. And really the first one. There have been other trails that have followed some of these sustainable trail guidelines. For people who hike up in that area, Hurricane and Rooster Comb were both rerouted in the last 10 years. And those definitely kept in mind some of these concepts of like maximum sustainable grade and trying to stay on a bench cut. But a lot of times in the Adirondacks, especially in the high peaks, a lot of trails were designed as fall line trails to basically just go straight up a hill, quickest way to the top that you can. And some of that was intentional. I'm guessing a lot of it too is just like whoever the first person that the quote unquote first person who did that, you never really know, set the trail. That just becomes the trail. It's like, oh, this is the way up. And then people start doing it. And then eventually it becomes institutionalized and marked. And some of those, a lot of those in the Adirondacks are just straight up drainages, just up exactly where water's coming down, because it's the easiest way up. There's this sub-alpine zone on a lot of the high peaks around here, the peaks over 4,000 feet, that is dense pine vegetation that is almost impossible to push through. Can be done. So the quickest way to the top is to avoid that and go in a stream bed, which works fine. And we have a lot of really beautiful trails that go up stream beds. And a lot of those trails, when they were designed, weren't designed to take the sort of impact that they're taking now. I mean, maybe 50 people a year were going on those when the people first started. And then now it wouldn't be unusual to see 50 people a day on the same trail. So it's just going to lead to a whole lot more erosion. So there's a little bit of a mental shift trying to get to the sustainably designed trail. And yeah, this is the first one where it's like, we're going to try to do it completely right. We're going to do this 100% of the way and try to build a 100% sustainably built trail. And there's huge challenges to that in the Adirondacks. One of those challenges is mud. Look at it, so muddy. This is not an uncommon view in the Adirondacks here. Basically, this area is a really, really old mountain range. And the bedrock is very old, and it's mountains that have just been worn down over years and years and years and years and years. And then plant matter is formed and decayed on the surface, leaving behind all this loamy stuff. It's basically like bedrock with a couple of feet or a couple of inches of really loamy, rich, dark topsoil, but what happens to that topsoil when it gets wet and people walk on it is it just instantly turns to mud. When it turns to mud, people want to walk around it. That makes more mud. It just makes the mud patch wider. So trails go from being 3 feet wide to being literally 30 feet wide on some of the bigger trails of people just braiding off and avoiding mud. So that's a huge thing in this area because there's not a lot of really good soil for building trails. A lot of it just is this loamy stuff. Really, you're trying to get some mineral soil, some like crushed up rock. If you were to go into like the Sierra Nevada on the Pacific Crest Trail, something like that, where they've been doing sustainable trail building for a long time, it's much easier. Basically, in order to meet all those criteria we just saw, you can just cut a trench into the hillside. It's made out of this type of rocky, decomposed granite that just gets rid of water and soaks out. And we don't have anything like that. So hunting for the right dirt was a big part of my job, honestly, mining for dirt and carrying it in instead of using the dirt that's right there. Yeah, so why don't we go through and I'm just going to show you kind of the process we went through for constructing this. First step, I mean, before we were even there, people planned out the trail corridor. And then it needs to get mucked out. So this is just a shot of like a raw piece of trail corridor. Maybe a bunch of people have walked on it to get to other sections of the trail they're working on. And all of that dirt needs to go. All of those roots need to go. They need to get cut. And basically all that soil needs to get removed completely. It won't be the final dirt that's in the trail. It'll get hauled out and replaced with better dirt. So first step is literally just creating a trench, and you're digging down until you either hit bedrock or you hit mineral soil. You hit some sort of soil that is angular, that is made out of crushed rock as opposed to decomposed matter so that it'll drain. Then you gotta get some material where you're going, a lot of stone and a lot of dirt. First is the stone. There's a bunch of ways you can move big stones. Happy to talk about that in the Q&A session. This is a brute force method using multiple people in a rock basket. You can only get rocks so big with this, but it works. We also had this, full disclosure, not my trail crew. This is an ADK trail crew. I got this off their website, so this is one of their crews, but such a great shot of a grip hoist. We had rigging that you could put into trees called a grip hoist, basically making a giant zip line that you can send rocks on. Grip hoists are pretty great. We had 2-ton grip hoists, so we could haul rocks that were 4,000 pounds. I mean, that's a pretty big stone that they're moving there, but I'd say we could move stones 4 times, 5 times that size with a grip hoist system if you set it up right. And then just good old fashioned rock bars too. I don't have pictures of that, but levering, using leverage to your advantage. And also all the rock they're standing on, that all has to get there too. That didn't just show up there. That stone is basically started how they're doing. You get some rock there and literally crush it by hand, smashing it down with sledgehammers to get it to the right size. So you have your trench cut into the soil that we talked about. Another grip hoist shot, really great ADK trail crew moment. You cut your trench and you can see in this picture, all that dirt was removed. You put in retention on the downhill side. These are just big solid rocks that hopefully when set properly aren't going to move. And then you fill in that trough with rocks, basically starting with pretty big rocks and getting smaller and smaller and smaller as you get towards the top until you have about gravel size on top. That's all crushed by hand because we're in a wilderness area. There's other areas that you might be able to do it. In fact, the very start of the Van Hoevenberg Trail is in an intensive use area. And that stone, a lot of it could be crushed by machine, but here we're using sledgehammers to do it. So pretty physically intensive. Filling in that trough. And then, oh, this is a similar thing, similar setup. This is like what a staircase would look like, basically before it gets filled in with dirt. This is what a trail might look like. Again, staircases is a structure we're trying to avoid. Like, people can answer more questions about that. Sometimes you have to use a staircase just to get up without going over that 15% grade. You kind of need a staircase, but ideally you would just be able to grade it properly, so you don't need to do that. And then you cap it. This is my friend Carly on the trail crew with a bucket of dirt, and she is filling it in. Like I said, we're moving dirt from kind of far away. There's a lot of ways we got good at finding dirt. In a pit and mound forest, which is where we're hanging out in here, the best way to find it is to look for literally a mound on the ground, because a tree will fall over, it'll pull up a root ball with all this mineral earth from deep, deep down. And then as the tree decomposes, it leaves basically just a mound of soil that you can grab, which is the perfect stuff for what we wanted. So we were hauling that stuff all over the place with buckets and dumping it on our trail and tamping it down, and then getting our 5% outslope. So our formula was, it depends how deep it is down. I mean, there's sections of trail. My favorite section of trail that I'm most proud of literally just looks like a path of dirt, which is kind of what you end up with. I mean, this is what you want to see at the end. A lot of people aren't necessarily going to notice the infrastructure. Some people might notice that it's lined with rock, some might not. In some sections, this trail is like 4 feet deep underneath. We filled that all with stone, but at the end of the day, it just looks like that. So that's my favorite. My favorite section of trail is one that we mucked out till it was like shoulder deep on me, and then it gets all done. It just looks like a dirt path. But that infrastructure is designed to hold a whole lot of traffic, which is an important part. Here's a summit shot we can settle on for a minute of the Van Hoevenberg Trail project, and why that trail. The Van Hoevenberg Trail project is basically designed to absorb a lot of people. That's the goal. It starts at the Van Hoevenberg ski complex, which is where the Olympic bobsledding and Olympic cross-country skiing was in the 1980 and the 1932 Olympics. So there's basically infinite parking there already. Parking is a huge problem on the trailheads around here, as this area has gotten a lot more traffic over the years, and especially in recent times. And most of the trailheads are just a pull out on the side of the road, which is fine if 5 people are pulled on the side of the road, but can be a real nightmare if there's 50 cars trying to be on the side of the road, which is not uncommon. Just parked roadside. And there's this trail, the Cascade Mountain is the shortest distance to one of the 46 highest peaks in New York State. It's a fall line trail. It has parking on Route 70, on Route 73. Basically just roadside parking on a 55-mile-an-hour road, and it is gnarly going through there. And what's going to happen with this Van Ho trail is the first mile of it, the trail's somewhere between 1.5 miles and 2 miles long. The first half mile or mile of it is the same trail corridor that's going to be shared for this the reroute for this Cascade Mountain, which will put all the parking for that popular trailhead in a parking lot instead of on the side of the road. So one thing's the parking, and the other thing is just there's a whole lot of people hiking right now, and our trails aren't designed to take that sort of force. They're eroding at a pretty high rate. So the hope is that designing a trail, going back to like designing a trail for what you need it for, we're hoping that designing the trail to meet that high impact, we can put a whole bunch of people in a parking lot and give people what they want out of a trail. A lot of people aren't trying to get up some sort of super gnarly trail. They just want a good view and to go for a walk. This is the view from the summit. And on that grade, that 10% grade, it's pretty accessible for a whole lot of people. Not a whole lot of trails in our area are. They're pretty brutal, rocky, up and over routes and down routes, which doesn't make for a good first hiking experience for a whole lot of people. Some people it might. So putting people on a durable surface, having this tread that is rock hardened, literally, should last decades and decades and decades and decades. And that's the hope. That's kind of the use of this trail, which doesn't mean it has to be the use of every trail in the high peaks, but it is like the first example piece that the DEC is trying to use as a fully functional, sustainable trail, because they're really hard to build in the Adirondacks because of those soil types. Like I said, other places are better, which I'm just going to kind of throw out there. I want to open it for questions just so people have time for that. But this is a pretty controversial trail in this area, and there's a lot of articles that have been written about it. I see one in the chat box. It might even be the one that I took those grip hoist pictures from, very possible. But there's a lot of talk about it, and you can imagine why. I mean, the amount of labor that has gone into this trail was started 4 years ago. It just finished officially this year. And tens and tens of people out there working the entire trail season. I mean, to do what we're talking about, to hand crush stone for that distance and move in soil from another area and pack it down and tamp it down, the movement's just really slow. I mean, you could be weeks on a section of trail that you can you can see the whole stretch of the whole time. You're just camped out next to the trail when you're working on it. So that's a lot of cost. You're paying a whole lot of people to do it. It's a lot of resources. And a lot of the debate is like, we already have hundreds of miles of trails. Why are we dumping so much resources into this when we could be fixing the trails we already have? And I think it's a valid question. I'm a neither yes or no person. I'm like, I don't see why there's not space for both. I think we can dump a bunch of resources into maintaining our trails, and we can also build some new trails that'll maintain themselves. But it's been a pretty big debate in this area. I'm happy to talk more about that too if people want. But it's exciting that it's done. Feels cool to have the project going. I haven't actually walked on it since it's done. I'm actually not working on that trail crew right now. I'm working in construction right now, started building a house, but I'm still pretty connected to the people working on that trail. I volunteered on it some this year, and really want to run up and see what the finished product looks like. So I guess in that, on that, whole lot of information there, but I'd like to open it up to questions. I see a question in the chat box already from Alex. Question being, why not mix sand in with the loam to get better drainage to the rock base? That's a great question. And the thing I'm going to have you ponder, which isn't to say you couldn't do this, that could be a really great solution, but you've got to get sand also somehow is another thing. And if we're talking in a wilderness setting, hard to move material around, like just as hard to get sand to where you're going as it is to get this mineral soil that's already existing out there. There is stuff that's been dropped in the wilderness area and the high peaks. Nothing mechanized is allowed basically, except for in a rescue situation and during this 2-week window in the fall called the helicopter window, where, yeah, machines are fair game. And we were on the summit that whole time. We were on the summit drilling rock. We brought a generator up to the top and we were not hand drilling, thank goodness. We were using gas drills to drill stone and split it so that stone could be used this year. We spent like a month in the snow just drilling rocks. So stuff can be dropped in. I mean, you could helicopter drop it in there if you wanted to like get some sand and leave it along the way. The question being like, how expensive will that be and how realistic is it for the state to pay for that? Probably more expensive than paying people just to haul stuff by hand from where it already is. So not a bad idea in terms of functionality, but in terms of practicality, pretty hard to get the sand there, just as hard as anything else. Are there any other questions floating around there? Or any other follow-up from Alex if there's more to that?
I'll jump in here. So the Mount Hope Trail is a new trail.
Correct.
Okay. And you say it's a couple miles long?
Yes. You would think I would know the exact mileage, having spent a lot of time on it, but I don't know. It's between 1.5 and 2 miles one way. It's an out and back trip. There's already a trail up Mount Van Hoevenberg from the other direction. You can't quite make a loop out of them. That one's not sustainably built and comes out of a different area, so the parking thing doesn't work. But yeah, it's a new trail.
I'll continue. If anybody else has a question, go ahead. But so I have a cabin in a different part of the Adirondacks down near Old Forge. And there's this kind of love-hate relationship with tourists. Is the same thing up there? Is this kind of, you need them because they bring in the money, but you can't wait till they leave type of?
I think it depends who you talk to. I mean, definitely that dynamic is here. The dynamic of like people coming to visit versus people who live here all the time. And there's even another dynamic too. In my area, there's a whole lot of people with second homes that live here literally for the whole summer. I think it's kind of cool. People have been doing that for years. And there's also like second homeowners versus, or like the summer people versus people who are here the whole year. It really quiets down here a lot in the winter. Like you said, is totally true. It's definitely like, yeah, tourists. I mean, the Adirondacks originally extraction, like mining and logging, that's how people made money around here. And with more and more land protected, which I personally like and benefit from, also means that like the only other thing you really got is the pretty mountains, you know, tourism becomes the thing. So it is where the money comes from. And yeah, I actually really like having the tourists here. Like the whole reason I'm here is because I was going hiking as a high schooler in this area, and it really stuck to me as a really special place that I want to share. And a lot of people feel that way too. So it depends who you talk to, just like anybody, but that dynamic exists. We got another question in the chat box. Question about your earlier work with outdoor work and staffing. How do you go about building curriculum around the idea of outdoor themes and being in the wild? How do we take advantage of our beautiful scenery here in Alfred and use it to showcase trails and nature? That is a big, big question. I could talk a long time about just those things. Outward Bound specifically, which is who I worked the most with in the outdoor setting, has a pretty set curriculum. And their curriculum is around character development. It's basically, a lot of people tell you we're teaching through the wilderness, not for the wilderness. So you're gonna end up teaching a whole lot about the area, about the natural world, about where your water comes and goes. I thought that was a really cool part about working in Philadelphia, is we would go to the Delaware Water Gap, which is the Delaware River is the main water source for the city of Philadelphia. So people from Philadelphia could go, and it's like, however you impact what's going on up here impacts the city. So it kind of connects Pennsylvania in a cool way to think about these watersheds. But the main ideas for us were really exploring ourselves, exploring personal growth, exploring how we work together, intentionally putting people in really difficult circumstances is a lot of what we're doing. Like the outdoor space, especially multi-day expeditions, you can't hide from habit in a lot of ways. It's like either you know where your rain gear is or you don't. You're either wet or you're not, and you can learn from that or you can't. And a lot of that translates into your day-to-day life. So that's kind of how a lot of Outward Bound curriculum was there. And a lot of our curriculum was more built around those character development pieces and how to use wilderness settings, and not only wilderness settings, but just how to use situations to help people grow. But in terms of how to take advantage of the area and showcasing it, I don't have really, really awesome answers. There are definitely cool trails, like up on Pine Hill is cool. Out by Phillips Creek, there's definitely some cool trail area around. Even just walking around Foster's Lake is really cool. I mean, in my mind, it's just showcasing it. It's almost word of mouth or advertising. It's just people knowing that it's there. Alfred is in a really cool spot for sure. It's not a place a lot of people think of necessarily. It's not the one that jumps out immediately. I'm rambling a little bit, but that's the best I've got on that question. Anybody else have any questions?
Other questions for Zach?
I have a question. So,
Yeah, go ahead.
how do you like be a member of like the trail crew, and like what are the qualifications for it? Like you said, you were like you got like an advertisement or whatever for it, but like how were you able to just do that? Like, could anyone do it, or like do you have that like?
Yeah, for sure. There are a lot of ways into a trail crew, and a lot of different types of trail crews that focus on a lot of different things. Like what I was doing building this trail was a pretty specific thing. I was working for the DEC, for the Department of Environmental Conservation. And to work for them, they do have a list of requirements. There's qualifications just like any job. They're often pretty broad, and it depends like who you're up against, I guess, or what they're looking for to hire. And we were really looking for people that, yeah, would do this incredibly brutal work of just like crushing rock day after day. But there's other organizations, even in the Adirondacks, that the ADK, the Adirondack Mountain Club, really awesome. They have a professional trail crew that does a lot of work. There's also ATIS in this area. Basically, there's a whole bunch of organizations, even just in the Adirondacks, that run trail crews, and just look out for a job posting. I mean, they accept a pretty broad range of what's cool. There's ones that you can definitely get, like for our crew, you'd have to be around for like spring through fall, but other crews just work in the summer. So if you're on a college schedule, you could find a summer job working for a crew. And like construction experience is helpful. Ability to like manage yourself outdoors is helpful if you have a lot of experience backpacking or walking around out there, helpful. And just being a good person, that's the main thing too. It's like if you're day in day out with people every day all day, just like ability to like maintain a positive spirit is like huge. You can lean on that for sure. Yeah.
You don't want to lose your temper and hit one of your colleagues with one of those sledgehammers, right?
No, a lot of paperwork. whole lot of paperwork if that happens.
Okay, if there aren't any other questions, that was great, actually. I've walked on a lot of trails and off a lot of trails in the Adirondacks and never really thought about those things that you're talking about. And now I know I'm going to be looking at the trails in a totally different, I'm going to be like analyzing them as I walk along probably, but I really enjoyed that. So thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And we can all virtually clap for Zach. And just next week, we will have, our speaker will be in person. It will be Sawyer McFadden. I'm trying to remember what year he was. I see his mother's on here. What year did Sawyer graduate from Alfred Almond? Lori can unmute herself, or does anybody know? I can't remember what year he graduated.
I just got a 2014 in the chat box.
Okay, all right. So he's a little bit younger than you. But Sawyer also grew up in Alfred, graduated from Alfred Almond, and Lori Lounsbury, Meehan's son. And he is working as a hydrogeologist in Boston. So he's going to talk to us next week, same time, same place. It'll be on Zoom, but he'll also be in person. So you can choose how you want to enjoy the talk. So thanks again, Zach. That was fantastic. I'm hoping that it's as nice up there as it is down here today, and you have a nice weekend.
Great, thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thanks again, Zach.